Ray shields. Wait a minute. How did this happen? We're smarter than this.
Apparently not.
Today, I wanted to talk about Vader and Anakin's emotional conflict with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Earlier in the Kenobi series, we see Vader originally planning to bring Obi-Wan in after putting him through the fire and making him feel a small taste of what Vader himself went through on Mustafar 10 years prior. Then, it seems as if he's observing something or having a memory, some feelings coming back after seeing how pathetic Obi-Wan looks at being helped up like an old disabled man by a lifting droid and some other allies. Now, before we circle back to that, I want to establish Vader's predicament and his history, what it is he's feeling, and taking his past into account. We know that Vader has absolutely nothing left. Not only did he lose Padme, but as far as he knows, that chapter is closed. He has no children, he has no connection to look towards, he has no good things in the past, only pain and reminders of things that he once loved or still loves, and therefore things he will never go back to, only pain and anger caused by the betrayal of his love for things, and always being teased by his current situation and the inability to go back to what he once was. He is so nostalgic for the past and for what he lost that he even tries at one point to resurrect Padme's spirit and nearly succeeds in Vader Immortal. I believe this is in comic books elsewhere, but that may not be true. Either way, we get the nice visual and we see the whole thing unfold in Vader Immortal. Now, his only living reminders of the past that he's lost are the remaining Jedi, which connect him to his past and his abandonment towards his mother at a young age, having to leave her, and that the Jedi are kind of partly responsible for that, and he wasn't really old enough to completely understand fully what that would mean. The inability to save her the same way he couldn't save Padme when she was apprehended by the Tusken Raiders and tortured and tied up, and he partially blames the Jedi and the Council for his situation in life. Let's also not forget that on top of losing his mother and Padme, in between both of those events, he also lost Ahsoka. She became just as disillusioned with the Jedi Order as Anakin himself had gradually become. After Ahsoka had been framed for a bombing and later a murder, the Jedi Order wasn't much help in believing someone who had become a hero in her own right and did so much for them during the Clone Wars, temporarily kicking her out of the Jedi Order due to, at first, the convincing evidence as to her guilt. Once she was finally vindicated, it was too late. The damage was done, and Ahsoka was disillusioned. This is a child that Anakin raised during the Clone Wars, much in the same way Kenobi had raised Anakin, someone that meant something to him, his own Padawan. And in the end, once it was proven that Ahsoka, the Padawan, was framed, she was disgusted by the Order, and it's specifically due to the Jedi that Anakin would lose the second most important person in his life at that point, Ahsoka Tano. Vader cannot help but feel conflicted and taboo feelings for his past and for his old master, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Not only is it considered weakness by the Sith to be nostalgic for things you miss, and even weaker to have love and compassion for people, but since it constantly lives in Vader, it angers him that he is made to feel this way, and if he could bring himself to fully kill Obi-Wan, he feels it's possible to be free from this and from his past, that once he is snuffed out, there is no going back. Now, I'm not a huge fan of episodes 8 and 9 in the saga, but in episode 7, we do see this parallel with Kylo. He says to Han that in order to complete this turn and this transaction with the dark side, he knows he must kill his father, but just doesn't know if he has the strength to do it, and ultimately he does, but still we see conflict. We see at the end of the episode, Palpatine confirms this in his meeting with Vader after the battle with Kenobi in the finale by saying, quote, "I wonder if your thoughts are clear on this, Lord Vader," and quote, "Perhaps your feelings for your old master have left you weakened." There's that weakness I talked about. Now, Vader lies and denies his feelings by saying, quote, "Kenobi means nothing." But of course, if Palpatine is saying what he's saying, it's because he senses it and it's a fact. At that moment, Palpatine smiles because he can feel Vader's genuine anger swelling in him, which is a great tool for Palpatine to use to continue to manipulate Vader as he's always done and will continue to do for quite a while. By the time we get to A New Hope, of course, Vader has lost even more hope himself and has become more grizzled and jaded, and he is able to bring himself to kill Obi-Wan, but of course Obi-Wan tricks him by disappearing with what Qui-Gon Jinn teaches him about keeping his identity in the Force, a lesson that we see begins at the end of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, which is something we always knew but never got to see. It is important to understand that Vader always has that little bit of light in him that is never extinguished. If that weren't so, and he was 100% a brick wall, Luke would not be able to pull it out of him in Return of the Jedi. You need something that can be redeemed in order to, well, redeem. During the final battle with Obi-Wan Kenobi, we see Vader's helmet get sliced open by Kenobi, and a critical scene ensues, which is reminiscent of his battle with Ahsoka. This takes place years later, but we see Ahsoka say Anakin's name after slicing the mask.
Anakin.
We see Vader briefly get pulled towards the light, and he says Ahsoka's name in a half Anakin, half Vader voice, struggling to breathe.
Ahsoka.
Ahsoka says she will not leave him again like she did earlier when she was younger from the Jedi Order.
I won't leave you. Not this time.
Vader considers this. After the brief moment, his love for his past with Ahsoka pulls him towards the light, realizes there is nothing to go back to though, and Vader says,
"Then you will die."
He says the same thing at the start of his fight with Kenobi in the series as well. In the battle with Kenobi, Kenobi similarly slices the opposite side of Vader's mask from what Ahsoka sliced, and has a similar interaction. We see Kenobi horrified at the tragedy of Anakin's transformation. He says Anakin's name, and the show does this brilliant thing where during the moments Anakin is partially pulled towards the light, his eyes go back to Anakin's natural color again, and the blue lightsaber lights up his face. When he is no longer Anakin and his anger fills him again, he regains his Sith eyes, and we now see the red lightsaber light up his face. During his brief stint as Anakin, he emotionally and compassionately lets Obi-Wan off of the hook by saying, "I am not your failure, Obi-Wan." Anakin unburdens Kenobi and lets him know for a brief moment that it was his mistakes and his own decision that led him to this, not Obi-Wan's personal fault. As a master, it is important to note that this emotional conflict and Anakin's compassion has an overarching theme that the show brings to a completion. Ahsoka was able to pull the partial light out of Anakin from the right side of his mask. Obi-Wan was able to bring the partial light out of Anakin from the left side of his mask. But Luke Skywalker, a remaining piece of Padme so important to Anakin, was able to completely pull the whole light side out of Anakin by the removal of his entire mask. Obviously, I'm not speaking literally, it wasn't pulled out of the mask, but this symbolizes precisely what is going on in brilliant fashion. This also brings us to a simple reason Vader lets Obi-Wan get away earlier in the series. Initially, he puts Obi-Wan through the fire, burns him the same way Obi-Wan left him to burn on Mustafar, and was the direct cause of Vader's need for a painful suit that hurts him daily, and he sees the suffering Obi-Wan is going through and decides it's enough. He extinguishes the fire with the Force, throws Obi-Wan aside. Obi-Wan was informed during the fire that his suffering has only begun, so after that, Vader instructs a stormtrooper to gather Obi-Wan for further torture and who knows what else, at which point he is interrupted by a shot from an ally of Obi-Wan's and reignition of the fire begins. The camera shows Vader observing just how pathetic Obi-Wan is, this great master, this strong father figure, and sometimes older brother that raised him, being helped up by a droid and by Obi-Wan's allies. He doesn't even have the strength to be combative, he doesn't even seem to have the will to live, so Vader wants a fight. He wants a reason to use his anger against Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan is simply not cooperating. I think due to the ongoing conflict constantly in Vader's head, a little bit of compassion began to come out, watching this whole thing unfold in front of him and realizing some things. He was disgusted by his feelings and by his own weakness as a Sith to even have these feelings for Obi-Wan, and disgusted at Obi-Wan's own pathetic weakness as well. He expected more. We see him staring off in the distance through the fire, potentially having memories of himself as a child with Obi-Wan, realizing what things have come to. We also see the camera not only show us Vader staring and observing distantly, but precisely what it is he is looking at. They show the display of a pathetic Obi-Wan being aided and helped because he cannot aid himself. I find it interesting that later in the series we see Vader throw Reva a lightsaber to use against him, specifically because he likes a little bit of a challenge when he sees some fire in someone, some angst, some energy, some anger to express, and so he actually encourages something other than the easy kill, even with Reva, so I feel like they answered that piece of it too. But of course, this was all just a way for Vader to display who's actually the one in charge here and easily defeats her. But he probably expected more initially due to how angry she was and how full of vengeance, and he knew exactly why she was filled with vengeance because, well, he reveals he knows she was a youngling, and she was that youngling all along. Anyway guys, that's it for this particular video, and I'll see you next time.